Hello. A question I get asked very often is, what's the difference between Google Translate and a translation management system like BWX? Well, both of them translate. They're very similar in that regard. Just like a car and a bus or an airplane all get you from point A to point B. But when you look at the details, you're going to start seeing how they deviate very significantly. And depending on your purposes, one could be very good or very bad and vice versa. So let's talk about Google Translate. Google Translate is a machine translation service. You input a document in one language, you get a document out in many languages. It's very simple, very effective, very inexpensive. And the beauty of Google Translate is its exact simplicity, right? It has a lot of technology behind it, including all kinds of different levels of machine learning, statistical analysis, linguistic analysis, natural language processing, neural machine translation engines. So Google Translate is able to use a wide range of services in order to provide often surprisingly good translations for any given kind of text. Now, the challenge with language is that language is often very, very context sensitive. That means that sometimes it can be context sensitive in the sense that maybe the home page may translate as the main page as opposed to the home page in a given language, for instance, like different metaphors switch. Could be that the brand vocabulary that your company uses for a given term is different than what another company uses for that same term. Could be sensitive according to the legality of certain terms. So there's a lot of linguistic contextual sensitivity, right? And when you translate something as a one-off, for instance, you have a file and you just need it translated just to get the gist of it, Google Translate can be an amazing option for you. You don't have any setup investment. You don't have to configure anything. You put in a document, you say it detects which language something's in, you tell it what language you want it in, and you're all good. But again, when you start to look at the details of how languages, how content is managed, then you start seeing that sometimes you need a little bit more than that. And that little bit more than that is something like BWX, a translation management system. In the end, like I said, at BWX also you get documents in, translated documents out. So from a very macro perspective, they do the same thing. But when you look at BWX, it's like offering you a whole range of buttons, panels, knowledge management that customizes your experience and makes it scalable, repeatable, sustainable, and very cost effective when it becomes a process that's widely done again and again. So first, if you think about the framework, BWX is able to leverage something like Google Translate, just like it's able to use other machine translation engines from Microsoft or AWS or DeepL or Baidu or other engines. But it's not only that. What BWX is able to do is it allows you to define your context. It allows you to teach it, whether implicitly or explicitly, that you don't want to translate homepage as the literal homepage. You want to translate homepage as the main page of a website, just as that example. It's able to store your changes. So like, let's say you put in a document and you send it to someone in Germany or someone in Japan or someone in Brazil. We're going to make edits over that document. Now in the Google Translate scenario, those edits are going to be gone once they're done. They're not going to be stored anywhere to be leveraged again. In a BWX scenario, let's say you have a contract that's done and then gets sent to your legal team in Brazil. That legal team in Brazil may make adjustments. Oh, I don't want to call contract this word. I want to call it another word. Those changes are going to be stored at several different levels. They're going to be stored at the terminology level, at the sentence level. When you reprocess a different version of that same document, you're going to get very similar results. You're not going to have to make the same changes over and over and over again. When you're talking about language, that's huge, right? And especially in companies, you tend to have tremendous levels of versioning over contracts, over templates, over web pages. Versioning is just part of life. You iterate again and again and again. In a Google Translate scenario, every time you iterate over a translation, those edits are lost. BWX is it allows you to iterate in a controlled environment where you can actually control exactly what context you're teaching it each and every time you're processing a document. So you have things like a translation memory and a glossary, which are knowledge bases that are always working side by side along with the documents that you're working on. So you can have one knowledge base that's specific to your legal content that's different than your knowledge base for marketing content. You can have your workflow from one person to another, and you can have all of those edits live in the same place in the end. That provides a much broader context for the work to be executed. It allows language to evolve in very specific contexts that you can control. And that's something very, very powerful. When you compare and contrast against Google Translate, what you're getting are a lot more buttons and levers that you can push and press to not only control the output by selecting the exact translation engines that you want to involve, by selecting the knowledge base that you want to deem relevant, but also by centralizing all of the edits that are then done to those assets. Moving on, Google Translate doesn't provide you for a framework of who is working on what. It doesn't provide you for a framework of how much a certain translation is going to cost. It doesn't provide you with a quality framework. It doesn't provide you with a whole class of governance features that allows you to truly scale up a translation effort. A lot of translation efforts are very simple. I just need a document translated. Most of the times they start off with something very simple. We just need to have our product available in another language for this reason. But it's incredible how much localization and translation tends to scale up and creep up very quickly on people's radars. So people will typically start by thinking, I want the most simple solution. The most simple solution is the most effective solution. But in my opinion, in all these 20 plus years working in translation and localization, the simple isn't often the best place to start. Often the best place to start is looking at a balance between simplicity and scalability. And things scale very, very quickly in translation and localization. So think about it. If you have a given set of documents and you translate them into one language, they double. Into 3 languages, they become 3 times and 4 times and 5 times every time you add the language. So it's not increasing your content load by that much isn't something trivial. From an organizational perspective, it becomes really, really difficult and challenging to keep track of where things are, who did what, when, where, why. Governance is not just a nice thing to have. It's imperative. It's paramount. Otherwise, things get out of control very quickly. It's very hard to keep track of quality. It's very hard to keep track of who needs to be paid what needs to change. It's very hard to implement any kind of continuous improvement. And that's really the clear difference, right? In Google Translate, you have a very specific service that can potentially do an excellent job for a given request. Now, when you're working in projects or program, things that repeat themselves, that's when you're going to see the need to have a lot more bells and whistles to make sure that the output that you're getting isn't just random or different every time. It's predictable, it's repeatable, it's improvable. So that's really the key difference, in my opinion, between BWX and Google Translate. BWX is a software that allows you to do anything from a very simple translation process to very complex translation and localization programs. It leverages a service like Google Translate in order to provide more efficiency to translators, more context-sensitive translations. But that's only a very small bit of what it does as a whole. So when you're looking at it from a very broad perspective, Google Translate is a subcomponent of what a software like BWX delivers, whereas BWX is actually focusing on integrating so many different components, ranging from knowledge management to project management to cost management, quality management, bringing all of these concepts together so that you can make feasible the leveraging and the management of a very large and potentially complex localization program. So I hope my explanation helped. Look forward to seeing you in more videos. Take care and bye-bye.